Lord, to you of these things we pray. Help us to see you more clearly, to love you more dearly, to follow you more nearly, day by day. Amen. Please be seated. So we are now 4 weeks, and by my count, 4 weeks into our exploration of how it is that we are saved by the resurrection. In case anybody, y'all weren't here along the way, we've been exploring that, yes, we love to proclaim that Jesus died and rose for us and that we're saved by that, but we don't often talk about how does that save us. And so today, one of the ways I want to talk about how the resurrection saves us is this idea that in Jesus' death and in his resurrection, what we're talking about is taking old way of life that we've been living and dying to that old way of life and being born again, being resurrected into a new way of living. And that because Jesus did that in his resurrection, we are all being invited to be a part of dying to an old way of life and being resurrected into new life. Now, if we look at Jesus, look at the world that Jesus was living in. It was a world that was deeply divided. It was divided by status. It was divided by nationality. It was divided by haves and have-nots. Who was in the right and who was in the wrong. Part of it, they were in the Roman occupation. There were citizens and non-citizens, and that made a difference. And if you were a citizen and you weren't going to be caught dead hanging out with a non-citizen, right, that might look really bad. Right? Or even if you weren't a Roman citizen, even in Jesus' own community, in his own culture, it was strongly guided by honor and shame. And boy, you bring shame on your family if you loved too much on a Samaritan, right? Or if you were maybe forsaking following the letter of the law in order to follow the spirit of the law. And making sure the difference between clean and unclean. There were lots of dividing lines in society. And Jesus comes in and he loudly proclaims, we are dying to that old way of division and judgment and hatred and looking at our neighbor as other. Jesus showed it in his life before he even died. It was leading up to his dying to this old way of life. He would go and he would dine with the tax collectors and dine with the sinners as part of what led to him dying to this way of life. He wasn't playing by the right rules. And then when he was killed and died to that way of division and hatred and judging others as being inferior, not being worth being in relationship with, he rose again to new life. And look who he rose to. He rose and he appeared to those who believed, as well as those who struggled to believe. He rose and he appeared to those who had been faithful, as well as to those who had forsaken him. He chose to sit and dine together with tax collectors and sinners, people who were different, people who disagreed. He even chose to sit and dine with Judas Iscariot, who he knew was going to betray him and lead to his death. And he chose to give him the body and blood of Christ too. Jesus gave it to everybody. And so he was being resurrected into a radically new life. And now here in the church, now we get to participate in that dying to an old way of life and being born into new life too. I think about how we do that in a couple of different ways. We do that through communion. We do that through baptism. And guess what? We're going to do both those things today. We're going to do communion and we're going to do a baptism. And communion literally means communion, coming together as one. And when Jesus held up the bread and the wine and offered it to us, and we come up here to this rail to receive with each other, we don't have a separate rail for people who are white and people who are black. We don't have a separate rail for Democrats and Republicans. We don't have a separate rail for Catholics and Protestants. or for those who believe in transubstantiation and those who don't. We come up here and we receive as one people. Because we are loudly proclaiming we have died to an old way of life where we say those differences matter, and are born again into a new life where we say the only thing that matters is that we are all the beloved children of God. So we come here and we receive together. That is a new life we're being born into. We practice that here every Sunday when we gather to do that. We're making a choice to do that. And then, when we celebrate baptism, now I've already promised the family, I've already promised Charlotte's family, we're not going to do this. Because there are some churches that do this where, when they want to practice being dead to the old way of life, they really play it out. They take the baby and they plunge him down into the water, and hold him down in there for a little while. We're not going to do that, I promise. And they hold him down just long enough that the person, they're thinking to themselves, this pastor might kill me. I might not survive this. And just at that moment, they bring the person up out of the water. And they feel like they literally have died almost to that old way of life. And when they gasp that new breath of air in, it's like breathing in a new life. Now, aside from it, we're not going to do that because that's horribly traumatizing to people and causes nightmares, right? But look how we do represent that. We do that in our vows. Look at the vows that we're going to make together. We're all going to stand up with each other, and we're going to proclaim loudly that we're going to seek justice for all people. That we're going to love everybody. We're going to love each and every person as our neighbor. That we're going to seek to make amends, and when we fall short, not if we fall short, but when we fall short, we're going to repent and turn around and change our ways. Those vows are all about taking an old way of life that this world lived in. It was about division and difference and judgment, and about saying we are dead to that old way of life and being born to a new life. Now, Miss Charlotte back there, she's only about a few months old. Right? She doesn't have much old life to die to, does she? Right? But we get to do something really special here as a community. We get to gather together and say what? Charlotte's going to get to grow up in a world where we have proclaimed that world, we're putting it away. That world where our divisions, the fact that we're different from each other, that used to hold us apart from being in relationship, that used to lead to judgment and hatred. We're dying to that old way of life, together with her. And that we're going to make sure together that Charlotte's going to grow up in a world where we get to proclaim what this life is about. And it's going to be a life of relationship, walking with God, seeking justice, loving mercy together. So, Jesus saves us in his death and resurrection. Because in his death and resurrection, he invites us to participate in communion and in baptism, where we mark that we too have died to an old way of living and are resurrected into a new way of life, saved by Jesus Christ our Lord.